I knew something had shifted the morning I found the folder. It was sitting on the kitchen counter, right next to my coffee maker, as if my daughter-in-law had simply forgotten to put it away. A plain manila folder, nothing special about it from the outside. But the tab had a label on it, my name, followed by the word estate. I stood there in my robe, the coffee still brewing, and I just stared at it for a long moment. My hands didn't shake. That surprised me. I picked it up, opened it, and read every single page. They were already dividing my house, and I was still very much alive. My name is Ruth. I am 67 years old. I live, or I lived, depending on how you count, in a brick house on a quiet street in San Antonio, Texas, a house my husband Gerald and I bought 31 years ago. Gerald passed 4 years back, a Tuesday morning in October, quietly, the way he did most things. After he was gone, the house felt like it had too many rooms and not enough sound. So when my son Marcus and his wife Diane offered to move in to help out, they said, to keep me company, to make sure I wasn't alone. I said yes. I said yes the way you say yes to people you love without reading the fine print. That was 2 years ago. I want to be fair. In the beginning it was good. Marcus would sit with me in the evenings and we'd watch old movies, the same ones Gerald used to fall asleep during. Diane cooked on Sundays, big pots of things, and the house smelled like a family again. My granddaughter Sophie, who was 9 at the time, would climb into my lap and ask me to tell her stories about when her father was little. Those evenings felt like a gift. But something changes when people get comfortable. It happens slowly, so slowly you almost don't notice it at first. It's a small thing here, a small thing there. And then one day you look around and realize you are standing in your own home feeling like a guest. The first thing I noticed was the grocery bill. I had always been the one to buy groceries. It was my house, my kitchen, my habit. But after about 3 months, Marcus started handing me receipts. Not asking, just handing. Diane needed a particular brand of shampoo. Sophie was in a new soccer league, and the registration fee was $300. Could I cover it just this once? I covered it. Then once became every time. I told myself it was temporary. They were getting settled. Marcus had just started a new job. Things would even out. They did not even out. By the end of the first year, I was paying for everything. The electricity, the water, their car insurance, the streaming subscriptions I didn't even use, the membership to a gym across town that Diane went to twice and then forgot about. Marcus made a decent salary. I knew this because he'd mentioned it proudly when he got the promotion. But when I once, gently, asked if they might start contributing to the household expenses, he got very quiet in a way that made me feel like I had said something cruel. "Mom," he said, "we came here to help you." I let it go. I shouldn't have, but I did. The thing about being a mother is that you are trained from the very beginning to give. You give when you're tired. You give when you have nothing left. You give because somewhere along the way, you started believing that giving is the same thing as loving. It took me a long time to understand that those are two very different things. Diane had a way of making me feel small without ever raising her voice. It wasn't anything you could point to directly. It was the way she rearranged my kitchen cabinets without asking, and then looked at me with slight impatience when I couldn't find the mixing bowls. It was the way she'd speak for me at family dinners, finishing my sentences or correcting small details of stories I was telling about my own life. It was the way she redecorated the living room, my living room, while I was visiting my sister in Dallas for a week, and when I came home and stood in the doorway looking at furniture I didn't recognize, she smiled and said she thought I would love the refresh. I did not love the refresh. Gerald's armchair was gone. The one he used to sit in every Sunday morning with his newspaper and his coffee. I asked where it was and Diane said she donated it because it was worn and didn't match the new color palette. I went to my bedroom, and I sat on the edge of my bed, and I thought about Gerald for a long time. That was the first night I cried since the funeral. My sister Carol called me later that week. She lives in Austin, sharp as a tack at 72, the kind of woman who has never once let anyone talk her out of something she knew was right. I told her about the chair. I told her about the groceries, and the bills, and the gym membership. There was a pause on her end of the line, and then she said, very carefully, "Ruth, how long are you going to let this go on?" I didn't have an answer for her. The folder changed that. I had come downstairs early that morning, earlier than usual. I hadn't been sleeping well. I kept waking at 3, 4 in the morning, my mind running over numbers and small humiliations the way it does when something is wrong and you haven't admitted it to yourself yet. The coffee was set on a timer. I shuffled into the kitchen in my slippers, reached past the folder to grab my mug, and then stopped. I don't know what made me pick it up. Maybe it was the label. Maybe it was the fact that it was sitting in the open on my own counter, like it had every right to be there. I opened it and I read it and I understood. Inside were printed pages, emails between Marcus and Diane, a conversation thread I was never meant to see. They had been talking to a real estate attorney, not about their own property, about mine. There were notes about the assessed value of the house, questions about how jointly held assets work when one spouse is deceased, a question written in Diane's handwriting on a yellow sticky note attached to the top page that said, "Can this be transferred before she passes if she agrees? Or do we wait? Do we wait?" I stood in my kitchen and read that question 3 times. I set the folder down. I poured my coffee. I sat at the table where Gerald and I used to have breakfast every morning, and I looked out the window at the backyard, at the rose bushes Gerald planted the spring before he got sick, and I thought very clearly, very calmly, not one more day. I didn't say anything at breakfast. Marcus came down first, poured himself coffee, glanced at the counter. I noticed the slight pause when he saw the folder wasn't quite where he'd left it and sat across from me. We talked about the weather. San Antonio had been unseasonably cool. Diane came down 20 minutes later in her gym clothes, grabbed a yogurt, kissed Marcus on the cheek, and nodded at me in the way she'd developed of greeting me, which was less like a greeting and more like an acknowledgement that I was present. Sophie came last, school backpack already on, hair in 2 braids. She was 11 now, quieter than she used to be in a way I had noticed but not yet asked about. She sat next to me and leaned against my arm for a moment, the way she used to do when she was smaller, and I put my hand on top of her head without thinking. "Grandma," she said, "are you okay? You look tired." "I'm all right, sweetheart," I said. "Just thinking." She looked at me for a moment with those serious dark eyes of hers, and I thought she was going to say something else, but Marcus called her name and reminded her the bus came in 7 minutes, and the moment passed. I waited until the house was empty. Then I called Carol. "I need you to come," I said when she answered. She didn't ask why. She said, "I'll be there by noon." Carol sat at my kitchen table and read every page in that folder. She read slowly, the way she reads contracts, which she has done her entire career in property management. When she finished, she set the papers down and looked at me. "How long have you known something was wrong?" she asked. "A while," I said. "And you didn't call me." I kept thinking it would get better. She nodded. She didn't say, "I told you so," which is one of the reasons I love my sister. Instead, she said, "Here's what we're going to do." We spent 4 hours at that table. Carol had brought her laptop. We went through everything: my accounts, the deed to the house, Gerald's life insurance policy, the investment account we had opened together in the 90s that I had essentially forgotten about because I never needed to touch it. We pulled up my will, the one I had written 7 years ago, before Gerald died, before any of this. I read it through and felt something cold move through me. I had been generous in it, the way you are when you are writing a document. You hope no one needs for a very long time, and you are still in the business of assuming the best about people. Things needed to change. Carol had a friend, a woman she'd worked with years ago whose husband was an estate attorney. She made a call right there at my table. We had an appointment for the following morning at 9. That evening was the hardest part. I made dinner, the same way I always did. I set the table, we ate. Diane talked about a renovation show she'd been watching and had ideas about the backyard. Marcus nodded and added details. I listened, and I ate, and I thought about the folder, about the sticky note, about the words, "Do we wait?" And I kept my face very still. After Sophie went to bed, I told Marcus and Diane I was tired and said goodnight. I went upstairs and I lay in the dark, and I thought about Gerald. I thought about how he used to say that the most important thing a person could do was to know their own worth. He said it about business, about negotiations, about life. I hadn't understood it completely until right now, in the dark, at 67, in the house we bought together. I understood it now. The attorney's name was Mr. Holloway, and he had the kind of steady manner that made you feel immediately that things were going to be handled correctly. Carol came with me. I brought the folder. I brought printouts of my accounts, and a list of what I had been paying for over the past 2 years, which I had written out the night before, going through my bank statements one by one. The number at the bottom of that list was larger than I expected. Seeing it written down in black and white was its own kind of education. Mr. Holloway listened to everything. He asked calm, clear questions. He did not seem shocked by anything, which was either reassuring or a sign of how common this kind of thing was, and I wasn't sure which of those possibilities was worse. By the end of the meeting, we had a plan. The will would be rewritten. The house, which was solely in my name, Gerald's name having been removed from the deed during the estate process after he passed, would be placed into a trust that I controlled entirely. The accounts would be reorganized. And there was one more thing that Mr. Holloway suggested, gently, which was that I might want to have a conversation with my son. Not to accuse, he said, just to make clear where things stand. I drove home with Carol. We stopped and had lunch at a diner we used to go to when we were younger, a place that had somehow survived everything, and we sat in a booth by the window and ate chicken salad sandwiches, and Carol reached across the table and held my hand for a moment and didn't say anything at all. Sometimes that is the most useful thing another person can do. I had the conversation with Marcus that Saturday morning. Diane had taken Sophie to a birthday party, and we were alone in the house for the first time in what felt like months. I asked him to sit down. I made coffee. I set the folder on the table between us. He saw it immediately. I watched the color shift in his face. "Mom," he started. "Let me talk first," I said. And I did. I had rehearsed it not to be cold, but because I knew that if I didn't have the words ready, I might lose them. I told him what I had found. I told him what it had felt like to stand in my own kitchen and read those pages. I told him about the armchair, and the gym membership, and the grocery bills, and the 2 years of feeling like a person whose only function in her own home was to pay for things. I told him that I loved him, that I had always loved him, and that loving him did not mean I would quietly step aside while he and his wife planned the distribution of a life I had spent 40 years building. He cried. That surprised me. Marcus had not cried in front of me since he was a teenager. He sat across from me at the kitchen table with his coffee going cold, and he cried. And he said things I won't repeat here because some of what he said was private and belongs only to us. But I will say this. He had not known about all of it. He had let Diane take the lead on the financial conversations. the way he had let her take the lead on most things for years, and he had not asked enough questions. That is not an excuse. He knew that, and he said so. I didn't realize how much I'd stopped seeing you, he said. I know, I said. That's the part that hurt the most. We sat there for a long time. Outside, a neighbor was mowing his lawn. The rose bushes Gerald planted were starting to bloom. I could see the first red ones from where I sat. I thought about the fact that Gerald had been gone 4 years, and those roses still came back every spring. Something about that felt important, though I couldn't have explained exactly why. Diane was harder. She did not cry. She came home that afternoon, saw Marcus's face, looked at the folder on the table, and went very still. The conversation that followed was shorter than the one with Marcus, and more uncomfortable, in the way that conversations are when one person is being very careful and the other person is deciding whether to be honest or defensive. Diane was defensive at first. Then, after a long silence, she said something I didn't expect. I was scared, she said. I grew up watching my parents lose everything when they got old. I wanted us to be safe. I heard that. I understood it even. Fear does not excuse what she had done, but it explained something, and there is a difference between those two things. What I told her was this. If she and Marcus had come to me openly, as partners, as family, and said we are worried about the future, can we talk about what happens to this house? That would have been a different conversation entirely. I am not a woman who refuses to discuss hard things. But going around me, behind me, treating my life and my assets like a problem to be solved while I was still living it, that was not fear. That was something else, and she needed to understand the difference. She nodded. She didn't fully meet my eyes, but she nodded. 3 weeks later, I sat with Mr. Holloway and signed the new documents. The house was in the trust. The will was updated. My accounts were reorganized in ways that felt, for the first time in 2 years, entirely mine. I drove home alone. Carol had offered to come, but I told her I wanted to do this last part by myself. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a moment before going inside. The late afternoon light was doing something beautiful to the front of the house, the way it does in Texas in April, all gold and long shadows. I thought about Gerald. I thought about the day we first drove up to this house, how he'd gotten out of the car and said this is the one before we'd even gone inside. I thought about 31 years of ordinary mornings and Sunday dinners and the specific sound of his key in the front door every evening. He had built this with me. It was mine to protect. Sophie was sitting on the front steps when I got out of the car. She had a book open on her lap, but she wasn't reading it. She looked up at me with those serious eyes. "Where'd you go?" she asked. "I had some errands," I said. She scooted over on the step to make room. I sat down next to her even though my knees protested a little. We sat there together in the afternoon light and she leaned her head against my shoulder, the way she used to, when she was small, and I thought about how children have a way of knowing when something important has happened, even when they don't know what it is. "Grandma," she said, "are you happy?" I thought about that for a moment. "I'm getting there," I said. She nodded, like that was a reasonable answer. She went back to her book. I stayed on the step beside her and looked at Gerald's rose bushes, and felt, for the first time, in a very long time, like the ground beneath me was solid. Marcus and Diane are still in the house. For now. We are figuring out what that looks like going forward. The conversations are ongoing, and they are not always easy, but they are honest in a way they were not before, and that matters. Marcus has started handling their own finances separately. He has started seeing a therapist, which I think is good for him. Diane and I have not become close, and I don't know if we will, but we are at least speaking plainly to each other, and I respect plainness. But there are things I know now that I wish someone had told me 2 years ago, and I will say them here because I think someone listening might need to hear them. The people who love you will not need to go around you to plan for their security. They will come to you. They will sit down at the table and have the hard conversation face to face, because that is what people do when they respect you. If someone in your life is making decisions about your future without you, not for you, without you, that is not love. That is management. And you are not a problem to be managed. You are a person. Act like it. Do not wait until you find the folder. That morning in my kitchen, in my robe, with my coffee going warm in my hand, and those pages in front of me, that was the last morning I spent not knowing what I was worth. And I have Gerald's rose bushes outside my window, and my sister's number in my phone, and a granddaughter who asks me if I'm happy and waits for a real answer. I'm getting there. Every day, I am getting there.